Carl Jung discovered something that would make every narcissist uneasy. When an empath finally reaches their limit, they become far more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. Not because they turn cruel, but because they stop being breakable. After years of clinical work, Jung noticed a psychological shift so powerful that it rewrote everything we assumed about control and relationships. He saw that empaths, those deeply feeling people who carry everyone else's pain, eventually hit a point where they change completely. They no longer stay quiet, no longer keep carrying everyone's darkness. Instead, they turn all that pain into something powerful. Jung described it as an alchemical moment, when years of toxic energy turn into something valuable, like psychological gold. The empath stops being a sponge for other people as problems and becomes an unshakable force that manipulation can touch. What shocked Jung the most was that narcissists instinctively fear this change. They don't fear a fight. They fear someone who refuses to play the game altogether. Because when an empath is fed up, they no longer argue, no longer chase, no longer try to prove anything. They rise above the entire battlefield. This is where Jung's insight becomes even more important. He understood that the empath's gentleness was never weakness. It was strength, waiting to be activated. He wrote that the most frightening thing a person can do is to fully accept themselves. For empaths, this is even more intense because they must also face something they've been taught to hide: their own power. This is what I call the shadow integration of the wounded healer. Jung believed the empath carries the archetype of the wounded healer, someone who gains wisdom through pain. But he noticed something most people miss. When this type of person reaches their limit, they don't shatter. They transform. They stop healing from a place of sacrifice and start healing from a place of strength. This transformation isn't soft or calm. It doesn't happen while sitting peacefully with candles lit. Jung called this shift enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. The person who always gave becomes the person who chooses wisely where to give. The one who always absorbed becomes the one who reflects things back. Modern science now shows what Jung sensed decades ago. Studies by Dr. Judith Orloff and others confirm that empaths' brains work differently. They have more active mirror neurons, which means they feel others' emotions deeply. But this same sensitivity that once made them vulnerable becomes their greatest weapon when they learn to direct it. This is where things get really dangerous for narcissists. When the empath finally integrates what Jung called the shadow, all the anger, all the boundaries, all the self-protection they were taught to suppress suddenly come alive. Jung noticed that empaths don't just hold back their own emotions. They also absorb everyone else's, their parents' anger, their friends' sadness, their partner's shame. They become what you could call a walking container of unresolved pain. But when they finally can't take any more, they don't just explode. They transform everything they've been holding. Jung said they turn years of psychological poison into something completely new, what he called psychological gold. This is the transcendent function, the ability to take two opposing forces and create a third, higher state. Here's what this transformation looks like step by step. First comes recognition. The empath suddenly notices the pattern. They see every time they took on guilt that wasn't theirs, every time they apologized for someone else's bad behavior, every time they thought love meant giving until they were empty. Jung called this moment the lifting of the veil. The unconscious becomes conscious. The second step is integration. The empath doesn't reject their sensitivity. They use it differently. They stop absorbing every emotion around them and start using their perception to see through people. They can notice manipulation before it starts. Jung said that when empaths integrate, they become like seers, able to read the hidden motives behind people's actions with incredible accuracy. The third step is sovereignty. The empath no longer needs approval or validation. They stop looking for someone to complete them. Jung called this individuation, becoming a whole person, directed from within instead of by others. This is what I call the empathic paradox. The more an empath integrates their shadow, the more compassionate they become. But now their compassion is sharp and focused. They can love fiercely, but refuse to be used. This is terrifying for anyone who depends on the empath staying small and easy to control. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, but deep down you felt like there was power inside that sensitivity, this is what Jung was talking about. This is the dark side of empathy, not absorbing everyone's pain, but using that sensitivity to protect yourself and choose where your energy goes. When an empath wakes up, their sensitivity becomes precise. They can feel what a narcissist is feeling beneath the mask. They sense when someone is lying. They see patterns other people miss completely. Jung called this active imagination, the ability to perceive hidden psychological realities. An awakened empath becomes something like a truth detector. No amount of charm or gaslighting can trick them anymore. Let's look at 3 examples to see this in action. Sarah worked with a co-worker who always took credit for her work and shifted blame onto her whenever something went wrong. For years, she doubted herself and believed his lies. But when she applied Jung's ideas, she saw the pattern clearly. She stopped defending herself, stopped over-explaining, stopped trying to prove her worth. Without her emotional energy to feed on, her co-worker's act started to fall apart. People began noticing his behavior on their own because Sarah was no longer absorbing the tension for everyone else. Jung would say she became psychologically immune to his manipulation. Michael grew up with a mother who controlled him through guilt and shame. Whenever he tried to set boundaries, she threatened him emotionally or played the victim. For decades, he carried her emotions as if they were his responsibility. When Michael learned about individuation, he stopped participating in the drama. He could still care about her pain, but no longer carried it for her. He set boundaries without giving long explanations and refused to argue about his worth. At first, her manipulations became louder, but eventually they stopped. She had to find other ways to deal with her emotions, because Michael no longer played the role she needed him to play. He became manipulative. Lisa was in a relationship where she constantly managed her partner's moods and blamed herself whenever they got upset. She thought that was what love meant. But when she discovered Jung's work on projection, she realized that every criticism was really about her partner's own unaccepted issues. Lisa stopped defending herself and trying to earn love from someone who couldn't give it. The relationship ended quickly. Without her participation, her partner couldn't keep up the illusion of being superior. In all these cases, the empath didn't turn cold or cruel. They simply became conscious. And consciousness, Jung believed, is the biggest threat to unconscious control. A fed-up empath doesn't just leave a toxic situation. They transform it into wisdom that protects them in the future. This is what Jung called the integration of opposites, the ability to hold compassion and boundaries at the same time, to love without losing yourself, to be open but also fully protected. When this integration happens, the empath's so-called weakness becomes strength, and their strength becomes wisdom. Jung wrote that enlightenment doesn't come from imagining light, but from making darkness conscious. For empaths, this means understanding not only their pain, but also how they allowed themselves to be drained over and over. They realized they weren't chosen randomly. They were targeted precisely because they have something real, the ability to feel deeply, to connect authentically, to love in a way the narcissist cannot. But now they stop giving this away without thought. They start sharing it with those who can value it. This is what I call the empathic revolution. They stop trying to fix broken people who don't want to change and start connecting with people who are also growing. If you've realized your empathy isn't something to manage but something to direct, you've just stepped into Jung's most powerful teaching. His framework for the empath's transformation is simple but life-changing. The first step is to recognize the pattern. See where you are losing energy. Notice who always takes but never gives. Notice the excuses you tell yourself to stay in draining relationships. Jung called this examining your conscience, not from a moral point of view, but a psychological one. The second step is to integrate the shadow. Jung believed this was essential for becoming whole. For empaths, this means reclaiming the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. Anger, selfishness, the ability to say no without apology. The shadow, isn't evil. It's simply the part of life you haven't lived yet. Your anger might actually be healthy outrage that was silenced. Your selfishness might be the self-care you needed long ago. Your ability to set boundaries might be wisdom that was mistaken for coldness. You start by practicing these things in small, safe ways. Saying no to something without over-explaining why. Feel anger without rushing to justify it, or immediately trying to understand the other person's point of view. Choose yourself without feeling guilty about it. Jung believed our psychological energy is limited and precious. For empaths, learning to protect this energy is everything. He called it psychological economy, the conscious use of emotional and mental resources. This means identifying where your energy leaks are and stopping them one by one. Stop explaining yourself to people who have no interest in understanding you. Stop trying to convince those who are determined to misunderstand. Stop giving your attention to people who use it as a weapon against you. Start doing what I call energy audits. Regularly check which relationships and habits give you life and which ones drain you. Jung believed that guarding your psychological energy, isn't selfish, it's required for mental health. Then comes the most powerful part, embodying authentic power. Jung's ultimate goal was individuation, becoming who you truly are instead of the version others expect you to be. For empaths, this means embracing all parts of yourself, not just the parts that make other people comfortable. Authentic power is not about dominating others, it's about ruling yourself. It's the ability to choose your actions instead of reacting unconsciously. It's the strength to love without losing yourself, to give without being left empty, to care for others without destroying yourself. This scares the people who once benefited from your unconscious giving because they can no longer predict or control how you respond. You become what Jung called psychologically autonomous, self-directed instead of being shaped by other people's needs. When an empath wakes up using Jung's approach, they don't just transform their personal life, they contribute to the evolution of the whole human collective. Jung believed that when even one person breaks out of unconscious patterns, it creates a ripple effect, what I call permission waves, that help others wake up too. The awakened empath becomes a living example of transformation. But Jung also warned about something called ego inflation, the danger of becoming arrogant about your growth. An awakened empath must stay humble. They must remember how it felt to be stuck in unconsciousness, so they can have compassion for those who are still learning. This balance turns them into what Jung described as healed wounded healers, people who can help without losing themselves in the process. This is where conscious, empathic communities can form. These are groups of people who have done their own inner work and can love each other without drama, manipulation, or emotional vampirism. Communities like these show what healthy human connection can look like, based on respect and equality, rather than control or emotional neediness. Jung imagined a future where enough individuals achieved psychological wholeness that the entire collective psyche of humanity would shift. The awakened empath is part of that vision. They are not just healing themselves, they are healing generations of broken relationship patterns. But here's what makes fed-up empaths truly dangerous. They expose the entire system of unconscious manipulation that many relationships are built on. When empaths stop carrying other people's projections, stop managing their emotions, and stop sacrificing themselves for causes that only drain them, they reveal how much of what we call normal is actually unhealthy. Jung wrote that the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the human psyche. When an empath becomes conscious of their power and stops playing their old role, that thread strengthens. This is why empaths often face pushback, not just from narcissists, but from entire families, workplaces, and even social circles that relied on them to stay unconscious. Their awakening threatens the status quo. Jung called this the tension of opposites, the clash between unconscious patterns and conscious awareness that drives psychological growth. The awakened empath becomes an unconsciousness disruptor. Their very presence forces others to confront their own behavior. Narcissists fear them because they can no longer be used. But even society as a whole fears them because they show there is another way to live, one that makes manipulation unacceptable. If you've noticed that your personal growth makes some people uncomfortable, but you refuse to shrink just to make them feel safe, you are living proof of this. Jung's deepest insight about fed-up empaths is that their real danger doesn't come from what they do, but from what they stop doing. They stop carrying what isn't theirs. They stop managing everyone's moods. They stop sacrificing their happiness for someone else's comfort. They stop explaining themselves to those who don't want to hear them. They stop feeding drama that doesn't lead to growth. This refusal is powerful. Jung called it psychological nonviolence. The empath doesn't need to fight or argue with the narcissist. They just step out of the dynamic altogether. And without their energy, the entire manipulative system falls apart. Jung observed that this can trigger a shadow crisis in the narcissist. When they lose the empath to project onto, they are left alone with their own emotions. This can be unbearable for someone who has spent their entire life running from themselves. Some narcissists escalate. They try harder to provoke you. They search for new people to drain. They become aggressive. But the awakened empath stays grounded. They developed what Jung called psychological immunity. the ability to stay calm in the middle of other people's emotional storms. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. They can still feel compassion, but refuse to enable destructive behavior. They can love the person, but reject the toxicity. This is something narcissists cannot manipulate, because it is beyond their understanding. Jung broke empathic growth down into 3 levels. Level 1 is the unconscious empath. This person feels everything but understands nothing. They believe that love means giving endlessly, and that boundaries are selfish. They attract emotional vampires because they don't yet know how to protect their energy. The goal is to develop boundaries, the ability to feel with others without losing yourself. Level 2 is the awakening empath. This person starts noticing their patterns. They begin learning about Jung's ideas of projection, shadow work, and boundaries. They take responsibility for their role in unhealthy dynamics, not to blame themselves, but to change how they show up. This is where conscious empathy begins, choosing when to engage emotionally and when to step back. Level 3 is the sovereign empath. This is the fully integrated empath who can feel deeply but not drown in it. They can love fiercely but remain whole. They have developed psychological sovereignty, staying true to themselves while still being open to others. Their empathy becomes a source of wisdom, not a weapon that can be turned against them. The journey from level 1 to level 3 takes courage. Jung said that becoming conscious requires facing how you may have unknowingly contributed to your own pain, not to punish yourself, but to take back your power. But Jung also warned that with this new power comes great responsibility. An awakened empath has the ability to see behind masks, to notice hidden motives, to detect lies. These abilities must be used with care. Jung said the goal is not to become untouchable, but to become real. The danger is becoming what once hurt you, someone who uses psychological insight to manipulate others. The highest form of empathic growth is what Jung called conscious compassion. This is the ability to love without enabling, to help without rescuing, to see the truth without judging harshly. Some empaths, when they first discover their power, are tempted to use it for revenge. They want to expose the narcissist, to humiliate them, to make them feel what they felt. But Jung warned that this keeps you tied to the same toxic game. True sovereignty is rising above the need for revenge. It is using your insight to build something better, not destroy. It is being dangerous to manipulation, but safe for real connection. The fed-up empath's power isn't in punishing others. It's in building a life full of real love, conscious choices, and peace. Jung's great insight was that the danger of the fed-up empath was never about aggression. It was about becoming fully conscious, fully sovereign, and completely immune to manipulation. He wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. For empaths, this means owning both their softness and their strength, their compassion and their boundaries, their ability to give and their right to receive. When the empath finally says enough, they don't stop feeling. They start feeling with precision. They don't close their heart. They open it wisely, allowing in only those who have earned it through honesty and growth. Jung noticed that the greatest threat to any unconscious system is not fighting it, but refusing to keep it alive. When empaths stop playing their old role, the old role dies. Your sensitivity was never a flaw. It was your radar, warning you about people and places that weren't safe. Your depth was never too much. It was proof that you were meant for deeper, more meaningful connections. Your longing for real love was never weakness. It was your calling toward people who can meet you at your level. The narcissist feared this moment because they knew that once you wake up, you can never be fooled again. Once you know your worth, you can never settle for less. Once you see clearly, you can never be blind to manipulation again. Jung's vision was of humans who have fully integrated themselves. Light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, love and boundaries. The awakened empath is the living example of that vision. They become dangerous not by fighting, but by living in complete authenticity. This kind of authenticity changes everything because it refuses to cooperate with dysfunction. It says, I will not carry what is not mine. I will not manage what I didn't create. I will not shrink so others feel big. If you're ready to stop being dangerous to yourself and start being dangerous to manipulation, you are already stepping into this new way of being. Your journey from unconscious victim to conscious creator is not just your personal breakthrough. It's a gift to everyone around you. Every empath who wakes up makes it easier for the next one to do the same.